Now hopping over to the state of Washington, Governor Bob Ferguson signed a new 9.9% income tax on high earners into law recently, which is projected to raise about $3.5 billion annually for public services like education, healthcare. But opponents are preparing a legal challenge and potential ballot initiative arguing the tax violates the state constitution. Here to explain a little bit more about it, we have the Center Square's reporter, Carleen Johnson. Carleen, thanks so much for joining me today. First off, could you kind of break down exactly who will be affected by this tax and how many taxpayers kind of fall into this category that Governor Bob Ferguson recently signed?
Yeah, the income tax is couched by supporters as a millionaires tax. So income above $1 million annually or combined household income of $1 million or more is taxed at that 9.9% rate. So if you make 1.2 million a year, that $200,000 is going to be taxed at 9.9%. The problem with this, even though it's couched as only a tax on the very wealthy, right, by supporters, is all the pass-through organizations. So if you've got a small business that, say you have a good year and maybe make $1 million or more that year, your organization, your business is going to be subject to this tax. And so groups like the Association of Washington Business said, hey, wait a minute, this is not just a tax on the wealthy, this is a tax on business. So that's been one of the main criticisms. And as you mentioned, Esther, already we have this legal challenge that's going to be filed in court later this week. We did speak with Citizen Action Defense Fund and their executive director, Jackson Maynard, who, told me just outside the bill signing yesterday, they're not waiting. They believe there are big time constitutional issues here.
And we do have a clip of you talking with Jackson Maynard specifically about the concerns they have for the taxpayer.
What's in store is that we have hired Rob McKenna to file a lawsuit. That lawsuit will be filed within days, and we will be challenging this unconstitutional income tax that the governor just signed into law. As Rob outlined in his memo that was given to the legislature that was unfortunately ignored by the legislature and the governor, the state constitution has a uniformity requirement for any taxes on property, as well as a cap on 1%. This clearly violates that.
Now, from what you've seen in talking with Jackson Maynard, what are the strongest legal arguments that opponents are making for the constitutionality of this income tax and potentially the impact it's going to have on taxpayers?
Right. The Washington State Constitution says, it defines your income as property. And so it would have to be a uniform rate. If you're going to put an income tax on millionaires, you got to put it on everybody. It has to be taxed. That's the uniformity clause in our state constitution. So that's what challengers believe is their biggest argument. And in fact, the Washington State Supreme Court has multiple times said that you can't do it this way. You'd have to have a constitutional amendment. And in the past, when voters have been asked if they want to amend the Constitution to, allow an income tax, they've rejected it multiple times. So voters have said you can't do this. The Washington State Supreme Court in the past has said that you can't do it. The issue now is we have a very liberal makeup of justices at the Washington State Supreme Court. So majority Democrats felt that the timing was ripe right now to go ahead and push this through. They think they're going to have a favorable ruling at the state Supreme Court.
Yeah. And in your interview with Maynard, he had a little bit more to say about that impact of taxpayers, like you've explained.
There's a lot of fear about this tax that's justified not only from the people, the businesses and the business owners that are in the process of moving from the state, but also for just people in the state who are concerned that this is not going to just be limited to the folks identified in the bill, but this is going to become a statewide income tax.
So as he said, it's going to have this impact of where do we draw the line? Where is the limit? And just like you said, explain a little bit more from what you saw in your reporting on next steps, right? What is likely going to come out of the courts? Will they block it, overturn the law? And I know that it's been signed into law, but is, it going to take some time to be taken into effect? What are we going to start seeing in the next couple of days and weeks, Carleen?
Right. So they attach an emergency clause, which makes this thing referendum proof. But Brian Haywood in Let's Go Washington, they've already filed a referendum. I'm actually going to be having a conversation with him later today because I'm curious to find out why go this route when you can't do the referendum. Why not just launch the initiative campaign? I think full well the intention is to go the initiative route. They're going to have a short window to do that because they'll have to go to the Secretary of State, get a title for the initiative, and then go out and start gathering signatures of voters. Based on public opinion that I've seen so far, Esther, they're not going to have any problem getting more than enough people to sign these petitions to then put something on the ballot this year, most likely this year. And why this year? Why rush it this year when you've got that short window? Because it's, I think, the first week of July when they'd have to turn those into the Secretary of State. I've been told the reason why is they fully expect majority Democrats to come back in the 2027 legislative session, again, trying the initiative killer bill. They pushed that through this year, ended up not ultimately passing because there was so much public opposition, but that's going to make it more difficult to get an initiative out before people. So they think if they wait until 2027, the initiative killer bill's probably going to get pushed through because they want to make sure that they make it more difficult to mount an initiative effort next year. So they're going to put that through this year. We're going to get a lot more information on this in the days to come. So I welcome an opportunity to come back and share again on your show to discuss this. This is got a lot of opposition here in the state of Washington, and I think public opinion is going to push this thing, probably the initiative, I should say, push this thing onto the ballot. I would be surprised, actually, if it doesn't get approved, the repeal.
Right. Yeah. And as you said, has been a lot of opposition to this with the question of constitutionality. And it seems that even though Governor Ferguson has emphasized, right, that this could potentially generate over, was it $3.5 billion in public services, that doesn't seem to be wavering to those in opposition, saying, no, that actually is going to impact the taxpayer anymore. Did they have any response to that amount of money that's going to potentially go to education or healthcare if this follows through?
Well, that's what's interesting is because in the bill, it expressly says, okay, we're going to expand the working families tax credit. So you get checks that go back to taxpayers, right? If you're lower, moderate income. Many of us might get a check in the mail. Is that going to convince people that, wow, this is great? Others say this is simply a redistribution of wealth. We're going to take this $3.5 billion a year roughly and redistribute it to folks, give some smaller businesses some tax breaks, expand the working families tax credit, maybe some for healthcare, maybe some for education. But ultimately, the impacts to business and whether this leads to mass capital flight, we're going to find out. Now, I should mention the estate tax, the death tax in the state of Washington, they increased that to 35% just last legislative session. Well, because they started finding out that a whole bunch of wealthy people were indeed leaving before they die here and have to give the state 35% of their estate, they repealed that. They repealed that this year. It was an acknowledgement that basically the wealthy are going to leave if you increase the taxes. Well, we just did that with the income tax. So whether or not we're going to see mass exodus of the wealthy, or perhaps the next Microsoft, Starbucks, Google, they're not going to locate here because of this, this income tax. So we haven't yet seen what those impacts are going to be. We've got lots of people saying it's not a good idea, but it's signed into law.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what the ballot initiative has to say, and the outcome of that will be following that. Carleen, thank you so much for joining us today. For those interested in following more of what's happening in the state of Washington, you can go to thecentersquare.com as well as watch Carleen Johnson report in Washington in Focus on our YouTube channel.